Marjorie Taylor Greene, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Why did you support the release of Julian Assange and the end of the US government's prosecution of him?
Well, I'm a big believer in the freedom of press and freedom of speech. And Julian Assange has been one of the greatest, I believe, journalists that we've seen in modern day times. He's won many awards all around the world. And I believe he did exactly what the freedom of press should be doing. And that is being a journalist that releases information that holds government accountable. Many people across the world don't know me very well, but I'm a member of Congress in the United States House of Representatives that has not agreed with my own government's foreign policy, foreign wars, regime change, and more. And I applaud Julian Assange for releasing information so the American people can fully know and understand what our government has been up to and what our hard-earned tax dollars has paid for.
OK, now last year, a delegation of Australian lawmakers travelled to Washington to lobby for Julian Assange's release. Did you meet them?
Yes, I did. We meet many leaders from all around the world here in Washington, and I was pleased to see them here.
Now, tell me, had you already formed the view that the prosecution of Assange should end, or were they persuasive?
I was already of that view. For many years, I have been calling for the release of Julian Assange. I have also called for the end of his prosecution. I support journalists all over the world and here in the United States that actually tell the truth. And I really think that the American people and people all over the world deserve truth. And Julian Assange did that, and he risked his life. He clearly lost his freedom for many years, wasn't able to see his wife and children, and he paid a very big price for it. But look at the information we found out. We found out what the State Department was involved in foreign wars for very many years. We found out a lot of information in emails with the Democrat Party and their convention. We found out so much information, and that's exactly the type of information that people deserve in free countries. And so, you know, I've supported him a long time, and I really hope him the best.
Now, you signed a bipartisan letter urging the Biden administration to drop the extradition and halt the prosecution. Obviously, other signatories to that letter are amongst your biggest political rivals, so strange bedfellows. What made you join with that group of people?
Well, I'm more, I really make up my own mind on the issues. And I know a lot of people, especially outside the United States, may not know that about me. I ran for Congress in the United States because I was equally mad at the Republican Party as I am the Democrat Party. And I hold my own party accountable. And so it's no problem for me to step outside the bounds of maybe what seems to be the rules, so to speak, for a Republican representative. For me, it's about freedom. And I really support free speech and freedom of press.
Now, that letter that you co-signed praised the Obama administration for declining to pursue charges against Mr. Assange. Why, in your view, did the Trump administration get it so wrong?
Well, you know, again, I don't think that Julian Assange should ever have been charged and shouldn't be prosecuted. Again, it's the issue that matters to me. And I will be urging President Trump, and he's already spoken about it several times publicly, that he will strongly consider a pardon for Julian Assange if he wins the next election in November. And I definitely hope to see that happen.
Now, more traditional non-MAGA Republicans, personified by Mike Pence, have criticised the ending of this case. Pence said yesterday that he should have been prosecuted to the full extent of the law for endangering American troops. You don't agree with him?
No, I absolutely do not agree with Mike Pence. Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, and other Republicans like him represent the part of the Republican Party that people like myself, and I would say probably 75 to 80% of Republican voters in America are fed up with that part of the Republican Party. I'm fed up with the Mike Pences of the Republican Party, and I'm sick and tired of politicians that get elected by the American people and sell out America constantly. So I can tell you proudly I'm against all of that.
Now, in the letter that we were talking about, it also references the fact that the prosecution of Julian Assange damaged relations with Australia. What were you concerned about jeopardising the US relationship to Australia? Because it's obviously not our alliances in foreign wars.
Mm-hmm. I would think that it would definitely strain relationships between our two countries because the United States was pursuing, and still is obviously, prosecution of Julian Assange, who's a journalist from your country, who the Australian people love, and he's so widely supported in your country. I don't want to see those type of prosecutions where we're locking up journalists that are trying to expose the wrongs of government. I think that's certainly something that can drive a wedge in between countries.
Now, this prosecution, of course, related to the war records and cables leaked in 2010, and in particular about the Afghan and Iraq wars, as you mentioned. But they were followed up famously by the stolen emails that helped sink Hillary Clinton and ushered in Donald Trump's presidency. Does that also influence your thinking about Julian Assange?
Well, what ushered in Donald Trump's presidency is the American people who were ready for a change in Washington, D.C. The cables and the information that Julian Assange released were much needed for the American people. I, for one, and many others, practically everyone I know, always questioned America going into Iraq. I think there were better solutions to what happened after 9/11, and information is important. And, you know, again, I'm a big believer in people. I think people are a lot smarter than governments give them credit, and I think information definitely helps.
Let me put the question to you in this way. I think you sit on a subcommittee of the Homeland Security Committee in Congress that looks at cybersecurity. You've been looking at attacks by the Chinese, cyber attacks on critical American infrastructure. Do you feel as strongly about the Russian-sponsored cyber attacks on the Democratic campaign in 2016 as you do about the Chinese?
I think every single country is concerned about cyber attacks. Anytime there's groups or rogue groups or possibly government state-sponsored terrorist or groups that are performing cyber attacks on critical information or even private businesses is extremely concerning. That's something that we're working on the Homeland Security Committee. We recently just had Microsoft in and talked to them, the president of Microsoft, about cybersecurity. We also have more hearings coming up on this issue. It's definitely an issue that is of interest to your government as well. People's information should be protected, and no one should be able to hack it and steal it.
So, but to be clear, you deplore the actions of the Russian government targeting the Democratic National Committee as you do Chinese or other actors?
To be clear, I applaud Julian Assange for the information that he released. And also remember, it was Bradley Manning, who was a member of the military, that released that information. That's the fact that seems to be forgotten. Bradley Manning now calls himself Chelsea Manning. He's a biological man that parades himself as a woman. And no one seems to want to talk about his engagement and role in all of this.
I'm just going to question the use of the word parade, but let me just come back to this to get some clarity. To be clear, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the cables in 2010. The question I was asking you about was the Russian state-sponsored attack on a member of the Democratic National Committee in 2016. To be clear, do you deplore the actions of the Russians in that cyber attack as you do the Chinese or other actors?
Well, you know, I think the information came from our own government. And that's the important part that we need to talk about. We need to talk about the information that are and the things that our own government was doing. I'm not sure why that's not the clear part of the questions. And that's what the American people care about. And that's what's important to us.
Now, the Assange story is essentially about the limits of the law, and Americans are typically law-abiding people. Won't millions of them have reservations about voting for Donald Trump now he's a convicted felon?
We have no reservations about voting for Donald Trump because the convictions are fake and they are a complete perversion of our justice system. It's actually embarrassing for the state of New York that they ran these sham trials and did these so-called convictions against President Trump, but yet they release criminals every single day on their streets. I don't think that you can even sound serious if you're talking on an interview and you want to attack the American people for supporting President Trump. We remember his presidency as being great. We could afford food, gasoline, electric bills. Jobs were plentiful, but under Joe Biden, we've pretty much been run by what's like a communist regime here that locks up their political protesters, is attacking and wants to put Donald Trump in prison for the rest of his life simply because they're terrified of him being president again.
But, you know, were it not for the ability of Mr. Trump's lawyers to delay proceedings, he might have a string of convictions before the election related to January 6 and his attempts to overturn that election. Do you believe that he will ever face trial for those actions?
I think it's a real shame here in America today that we're seeing our justice systems used in campaigns and to sway presidential elections. And that's something that I would think people like yourself would condemn and speak out against.
You've never accepted the results of the 2020 presidential election. Indeed, you've lionized people for the attack
Sarah,
on the
aren't we
Capitol.
talking about Julian Assange?
Well,
Sarah, are you even a serious interviewer? I thought we're talking about Julian Assange here today.
We are.
That's what you were asking me to come on your Australian news show. I don't usually do interviews like this because people like you can't be taken seriously.
Let me just put this to you, because you use the term truth as the reason why you have been so supportive of Julian Assange. So I want to go to one of the most dominant issues of truth in the American landscape. So, as I just said, you've lionized.
Coming from an Australian here, this is the dominant issue of truth. Okay, let's hear it, Sarah.
So you've lionized people imprisoned for their role in attacking the Capitol on January the 6th, including visiting them in prison. This is my question. What will Donald Trump's MAGA supporters do if he loses the election?
So what does this have to do with Julian Assange again, Sarah? I think that was the purpose of our interview. Let me tell you something that you don't quite understand. In 2020, America watched riot day in and day out with BLM riots that caused over $2 billion in our communities and cities across the country. Sarah, what the Australian people know that probably don't like your show very much, but they do understand the truth, is that in America today, we have a two-tier justice system. And the Justice Department, the DOJ, targets their political enemies. And President Trump is the very top of that. And people that protested the election on January 6th are also the target of it. And what you probably don't tell your viewers is that many of these people that are being arrested and put in jail simply walked into the Capitol building through open doors and videoed and took pictures of the inside of the Capitol, and then they walked out through doors. And that's, I'm sure, not the images that you show on your network in Australia, but it's a shame because that's what the media has done and twisted and lied. That's why we applaud Julian Assange, because he didn't twist and lie and tried to pervert the truth. He told the truth, and we appreciate him for that.
And if it doesn't go your way, if Biden wins, will you accept the result?
Again, what does this have to do with Julian Assange? Seriously,
it's the
really,
natural
that's what we're
extension of a
supposed to
question
be
about
talking.
truth. And why would I?
What network is this? What is this? ABC in Australia? Is she getting any marching orders from the Democrat Party? I mean, is this what you decided to come up with today?
You're a prominent figure in US politics. The first debate is tomorrow. The result of the election is on the minds not just of Americans, but of the whole world. So it's a natural point of curiosity. But I understand that we've reached the end of the questions that you want to answer. Thank you for talking to us about Julian Assange and for joining the program.
Thank you. Good night.